What's up everybody, RetroHeart here, and today I'm going to go through my current Resident Evil collection. So let's get started. So, when everybody thinks of the first Resident Evil, they think it was PS1, right? Well, that's not correct. Where it all originated from was this game right here. Sweet Home for the Nintendo Famicom. That's right, the Nintendo. It was released all the way back then on the regular Nintendo. But this was only released in Japan. But this is a very creepy game. There was actually a movie that came out released alongside it, which was only released in Japan as well. But it takes place in a mansion, a haunted mansion kind of. You have a bunch of characters in the game that all have special abilities. But once those characters die, they're dead for good. So sometimes you need those characters to solve different puzzles and whatnot. So this game is only in Japanese. So in order to play this, you're going to have to get a Retron 5 or a Retro Freak, and you can download a translation patch for it. Or you can go the other way and buy a reproduction cartridge of it, which is already in English and will play on your regular Nintendo system. Because this, you'll also need one of those Retron Freak or Retron 5 systems that will play all the cartridge-based games. But these are awesome games. I've been trying to get a copy of the movie. I don't believe the movie was ever released on DVD, but it was released on VHS. But for the prices I'm seeing, it's about $100 for a VHS, and I'm not paying that much. So yeah, that is where Resident Evil really originally started from, was from Sweet Home on the Nintendo. But the one that got the most popularity when it started getting big, it was the PlayStation. And here is the original copy. It's the long box version. Mine's a little beat up, I have to tape it, but original PS1 games used to be in the long boxes, which are always cool to find. This is complete with the manual, which is very cool. I loved this game when it came out. It terrified me. There was no other games like it at the time. And of course, because of this original one, they've made numerous copies and they've ported it to many different systems. So next would be another long box for the Sega Saturn. Now this game is probably one of the more expensive games in the collection. This game has bonus features that the original PlayStation version doesn't. It's got a battle mode. Also has a gold tyrant in it, the main villain. Very cool. Very great copy. Very great version of the game. Now, of course, after they got rid of the long box versions, they went down to these little CD cases. It's basically the same as the long, just smaller. And because this game was originally really released in Japan, I picked up the Japanese version, which is called Biohazard. That's what it was called in Japan. Biohazard. It wasn't called Resident Evil. Then, of course, they released the director's cut of Resident Evil. This is actually the one I had as a kid. This is the one I played, which included a demo disc for Resident Evil 2 before it came out, which is really cool. Get you hyped up for that. Of course, I have the Japanese version of that as well. Biohazard director's cut. Then when they came out with the new controllers, the analog controllers with the rumble, of course they had to release a DualShock version, which was the director's cut. Which was the greatest hits version, but it was a DualShock version. So added a few extra features, rumble. Some people liked it. And then, of course, Biohazard director's cut DualShock version. I had to pick that up. I also have the PC version I don't have the box for it. I just have the disc and the manual. But it's basically looks the same as the original PlayStation one. So, of course, they ported it to other systems as well. Let's see. They ported it to the GameCube, which was a great version. Updated the graphics, everything. Added a few more monsters, a few more mysteries, secrets. That was pretty awesome. Then that same version they ported to the Wii, which is very cool because you get to use the Wii controls, which is unique in some games. It's pretty cool. So I try to get the Wii version of everything. One of my favorite ports and versions is actually for the Nintendo DS. Resident Evil Deadly Silence. This is, I'd say, one of the best ports of the game. It's basically the original, the very first Resident Evil, but they actually add modes where you can actually use the DS functions. So you can, when you pull your knife out, you can slash the screen with the stylus and stuff. It's a pretty awesome version. I would recommend this one, definitely. And then many people didn't know that Capcom was making a deal with Nintendo to port the original 3 Resident Evils on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. But it never happened. But this is a reproduction cartridge of the first one because they did make the first one. It was 90% complete and then Nintendo canceled the game. So this is a version of that ROM that was 90% complete. People got it off the internet, the ROM, and then basically finished it or patched it so it is playable from beginning to end. It is pretty awesome game, pretty awesome feat that they made this on the Game Boy. I wish they would have released it officially. It would have been pretty awesome to have Resident Evil on handheld, but we do have Resident Evil on the handheld a little bit, but I'll show you that in a bit. But then, the last version of Resident Evil, the original Resident Evil port, was for the PS4 in the Resident Evil Origins Collection, where they did Resident Evil, the remake, the one that was on the GameCube and the Wii, and then they did Resident Evil 0, which was, it's basically a prequel, but it has Rebecca from the very first game, which is kind of cool. And of course, that version came out on the GameCube at first. It was a GameCube exclusive, but then they ported it to the Wii as well. This is kind of a prequel to the original Resident Evil. That's one of the unique features about that game is there's 2 players in it, and you can transfer between both players, so each player is playable, and you need each one to solve different puzzles. So you can swap back between players at any time. Sometimes one of the players will be on the other side of the map, and the other player will be on the other side, and you just swap back. You can also leave them weapons for each other, which is very cool. So then, Resident Evil 2, of course, probably my favorite Resident Evil game at the moment, or as an adult. Resident Evil 2 on the PlayStation 2, which was 2 discs, of course, which is very cool. You play as Leon, then you play as Claire. Now this game, as a kid, irritated me kind of, because apparently you were supposed to beat both discs and then play it again and beat both discs in a different order to get the real ending. And I think I played them, I beat it twice, but I think I played it in the wrong order, so I never got the ending. So I beat the game like 6 times and still never really got the ending as a kid. But it's a very awesome game. Of course, they ported that to systems as well. And of course, I have the Japanese version of that, Biohazard 2. And then the Greatest Hits version. I believe this would be the DualShock version. I do not have the Japanese version of this. It's on my want list. They ported it to the Nintendo 64 as well, which is crazy how they got that whole game on this cartridge. Only 64 megabyte cartridge. It has cutscenes and everything. Of course, the cutscenes are dumbed down a little, but it is on there and it's an awesome version. They also released it on the GameCube. They did release it on the Dreamcast as well, which I don't have a version of, and they did recently do a remake of it, which I don't have at the moment. But they also ported that to a few other weird systems. The Gamecom. The Tiger Gamecom, which is crazy. It was a handheld, black and white handheld. I did not know about this as a kid. I picked it up as an adult. But it was a real game system, portable gaming system from Tiger Electronics. But I did know about this. I have this here. This is a Tiger handheld as well. It had a version of Resident Evil 2 on there. Mine doesn't work anymore. The sound works, but the screen is messed up, so it doesn't work. I've been trying to find a new copy of this, but they're kind of rare. I've only seen about 2 copies on eBay, and they're pretty expensive. But I love this game as a kid. You could even you could link it up if your friend had a version. You could play a 2-player game. If anybody's played the Tiger handhelds back in the day, you know they're not that great, but everybody had them. And to have a portable version of Resident Evil back in the day when I was a kid was amazing. Even though it wasn't that great, I thought it was amazing. They also planned on making Resident Evil 2 for the Game Boy Color, which was never released. This is a reproduction cartridge. It was just a beta, like a tech demo. Maybe 5 to 10 minutes of gameplay you can play on this. It was what Capcom made to give Nintendo, be like, look, this is how the game's gonna be. Because remember, they were supposed to do 1 through 3 on the handhelds, on the Nintendos. But Nintendo backed out. They never wanted it for some reason. I don't know why. That would have been awesome. It's a pretty cool little tech demo on there. It's not much playtime, but it's pretty cool for what they have. Next would be Resident Evil 3, which was my favorite Resident Evil as a kid. This one was real unique because you had to make your own ammunition. So you had to use different powders and they would make different ammunitions, which would really screw me up sometimes as a kid because I'd be in a rush getting attacked by a monster or something. I'd try to make bullets and I end up mixing the wrong chemicals and making the wrong bullets for the wrong gun. So this one, in my opinion, was the hardest as a kid to beat. The ending, the boss monster, was the easiest to beat out of all of them, but the main game itself was the hardest, in my opinion. The Japanese version of that, which was called Biohazard Last Escape. It's pretty cool. The GameCube version. They released this on the Dreamcast as well, I believe, but I don't have that copy either yet. Next up, which was a unique game at the time, Resident Evil Survivor. It was a first-person shooter game. The original Resident Evil was actually supposed to be a first-person shooter game as well, but they scrapped that idea and we got what we got, which I loved. Yeah, this game was a first-person shooter game, but it was weird because you couldn't use the light gun with it. You couldn't use the light gun with it because it was released about the time of the Columbine massacre, so they scrapped that idea. But the European and the Japanese versions, you can use the light gun for, which is really cool. The game's okay. It's pretty short, but it's got a lot of the monsters from the series, and it's cool like that. It's not a great game, but I recommend playing it just so you can walk through the environments you're used to. But they also made a sequel on the PlayStation 2, which was never released in the US. It was only released in Europe And this you can actually use the light gun with as well. This game isn't that great either, but it's a lot like the first one. A game that is kind of similar to them that was released is Resident Evil Dead Aim. Now this game, when you're walking around exploring or solving puzzles, it is in third person. But when you're doing the action, it goes to first person. So whenever you're shooting enemies or anything, it's in first person. Whenever you're running around and solving puzzles, it's in third person. I thought that was pretty cool. This game isn't that great either. I mean, I had fun playing it, but it really has no story to it, so I was disappointed in that aspect. But it's definitely a cool game to play. Next up, this is still one of my favorite Resident Evil games, Code Veronica on the Sega Dreamcast. I love this game so much. This one and Resident Evil 2 are my favorite in the series. I wish they would release a remake of this one. That would be cool. That would be very awesome. Of course, some people may know it was the PlayStation 2 that kind of destroyed the Dreamcast and put them out of business. And of course, after that, they ported it to the PlayStation 2. This is a great version of the game, though. I will admit that. They added a few new things to it, you know, spice it up a little. But it's pretty much the same game as the one on the Dreamcast, which is cool. Of course, most people's favorite Resident Evil is Resident Evil 4. Originally released as an exclusive on the GameCube. But of course, a lot of things don't stay exclusive. It's ported to the PS2. It's ported to the Wii. It's ported to pretty much everything. Now this may annoy some people or aggravate some people, but I do not like Resident Evil 4. Anybody who says Resident Evil 4 is the best Resident Evil is just not a fan of the series. To me, the game is crap. I didn't beat it, but I did play about 12 hours of it, so I did put a good amount of time in it to say I don't like it. It's nothing like the Resident Evil series. It is just a shooter. So if you honestly believe that's the best Resident Evil in the series, you're not a fan of the series. Sure, you can love the game, you can like the game, but if you think that's the best one in the series, like I said, you're not a fan of the real series. What they should have done is release the version they originally made for that game. The first version was a lot like Resident Evil 1 through 3, where it had fixed camera angles, but it had a little bit of over the shoulder like you have in what was released. But the game involved, it kind of had like a supernatural feel to it. It was kind of like Resident Evil meets Silent Hill in a degree. If you ever see any of the gameplay footage online, I'd highly recommend watching it for the original Resident Evil, which I think they dubbed the Resident Evil 3.5. That's the original one. But yeah, that's my opinion on Resident Evil 4. It does have some cool monsters into it. I like the chainsaw guy and some of the bigger monsters, but I just don't like the game. I feel like there's no real story to it. I just feel like it's boring. But I have an exclusive DVD here of the making of Resident Evil 4. In-store use only, not for resale. It's a cool little short DVD. I think it was only given out at GameStop, and it was only for the stores, I think, to play on the screens at the time. But cool little thing. Okay. Now they have Resident Evil Outbreak and Outbreak 2. I did not know about these as a kid, really, because, well, I didn't get into the PlayStation 2 until later in life. but I probably would have liked these games as a kid or when they came out. Very unique. These games both had online features. You could play with multiple people online, start up a party. You just try to survive. You got to help each other out. It's a pretty cool game. You can still play them, but I don't believe the servers are up anymore, so you can't really play them online. I know a lot of people are hoping that they'll remake these on the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, and I kind of hope they do too. I'm not a big online player. I don't play multiplayer online or anything, but if they release these and have the servers up again, I think I might actually give it a shot. Next we have Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles and Resident Evil Dark Side Chronicles for Nintendo Wii. These are both awesome rail shooters, kind of like House of the Dead type thing. You can use your Wii mode or use the gun that comes with the Wii. The cool thing about these are a lot of locations take place in locations of the original series. Like I believe there's the police station and there's the mansion. So it takes you through a lot of the original locations, which is pretty cool. So if you're a fan of rail shooters at all, like House of the Dead, things like that, I recommend picking these up. Resident Evil 5. I have Resident Evil 5 Steelbook. I only paid about $2 for this, so I picked it up. Resident Evil 5 for the Xbox 360. I wasn't a big fan of this game, though. I tried to play it. I tried to play with a friend. I just couldn't get into it at all. Resident Evil 6. I don't really like this game either, but I think it's better than Resident Evil 5. I got into it a little bit better than that, but it's still, everything after Veronica is just not as good. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. This game, I hear a lot of people say this is the worst game in the series. I don't know if it's the worst game, but yeah, it's not that great. Now here's some games that they created which are later on, but actually are pretty good games. Revelations, Revelations 2. I prefer Revelations 2 more. It's a cool little two-player game. You can play with two players at the same time. Local multiplayer. It's a really cool game to play with a friend. Of course, Resident Evil 7, which some people call a masterpiece. It's a game that goes back to horror, since 4, 5, 6 were just basically action games. This one goes back to horror and includes a VR feature. The VR feature, you can play the full game in VR. It is a pretty terrifying experience. I recommend everybody try it at least once, even if, well, especially if you scare very easily, because it can be very terrifying. Now, they actually did release an official Resident Evil on a Game Boy, and that was Resident Evil Gaiden. And I have Biohazard Gaiden here, the Japanese version. This game was pretty cool, but at the same time, it sucked. It took place on a ship. It's kind of like a top-down view, a little bit. The action I didn't like. The walking around part was cool on the ship, but the action I didn't like, because when you went into action, it kind of went to a first-person view, but it was like a puzzle. It had the zombie, and it had like a little chart at the bottom. You had to match up the shot, bam. But it got really frustrating. You'd kill 3 zombies or whatever, you'd walk like 3 feet, and then that little mini game would come up again, and that mini game, it just sucked. It ruined the game, in my opinion. But they did release Resident Evil Revelations and Resident Evil Mercenaries. Both these games are cool because you can play local player, 2-player, if you both have the same cartridge and both have your systems. So I have 2 copies of this. I did have 2 copies of this as well, but I must have lost the other copy or sold it, so I have to pick up another copy of that. But it's cool because you can play 2-player on 2 different systems, which is very cool. Now this is a ROM hack of Streets of Rage, I believe. Crisis Evil 1 and 2. Streets of Rage, but with Resident Evil characters instead. So you take place in Raccoon City. It's a side-scrolling beat 'em up. You play as, I believe, Jill Valentine or Chris Redfield, and you're fighting zombies and zombie dogs. And one of the bosses is Nemesis, which is really cool. He's shooting at you with his bazooka. So that's really cool, little ROM hack. It plays on the Sega Dreamcast. And the last game I have isn't necessarily Resident Evil, but it is a hidden gem on the console, and I believe a lot of people don't know about it. It is Under the Skin for the PlayStation 2. Now you play as a little alien creature here, and you can disguise yourself as a humanoid type creature, pretend you're a human, and you try to play tricks on people, and you abduct people, kind of. Some people find out who you are and they try to beat you up or whatever. But the cool thing about this is there's a level in here that I think takes place in Raccoon City or whatever, and it has Nemesis and Jill Valentine in it. That is pretty cool. You'll be walking around the stage and Nemesis will start chasing you. He'll start saying his infamous stars, and he'll be shooting the bazooka at you. It's very cool game. It is just weird that a game like this would even have those characters in it. So it's definitely a hidden gem. It's definitely a cool game. I recommend it. So that's it for the games. There are more in the series that I plan on collecting at some point, but until then, let's move on. So, a lot of people aren't aware that they actually released some Resident Evil books. There are 7 books in this series, and they're actually pretty cool. I haven't read all of them yet, but the ones I have read are pretty good, and they actually resemble the game series pretty well. First one, Resident Evil 0 Hour. Second one, Resident Evil Umbrella Conspiracy. Resident Evil Caliban Cove. Looks like Rebecca Chambers on there from the first game. Resident Evil City of the Dead. Resident Evil Underworld. Resident Evil Nemesis, of course, with Jill Valentine and Nemesis on there. Cool cover. Jill Valentine's one of my favorite characters from the series. And then Resident Evil Code Veronica. That's an awesome cover. These are all written by S.D. Perry. So if you're a fan of reading, and you're a fan of horror, and Resident Evil, or horror just in general, I recommend picking these books up. They're very cool, and they stick closer to the original game series than some of the movies do. So with the books, I also have some strategy guides for the games, because of course I collect some strategy guides. These ones are both kind of cool and cute. Resident Evil Director's Cut for the original PlayStation version. They're black and white and red, but it's pretty cool. I've never seen little strategy guides like this, official ones. So those are cool. And Resident Evil. This looks like it's for the remake one on the GameCube, because the graphics look kind of cool. It says it has a poster inside. Yeah, it's still in there. That's cool. This one feels like it might be a little beat up, but Resident Evil 2, 1. Cool little zombie dog on there. Unauthorized Game Secrets, Resident Evil 2. It's a weird little zombie cover there. There's a crazy zombie dog on the back. Definitely a cool one, Resident Evil 3. I usually pick these up at flea markets and yard sales. Try to find them for cheap. Sometimes I find them at game stores, older game stores that actually have them for a couple dollars, which is pretty cool. Some places try to charge you like $20 still for strategy guides. That's Code Veronica, of course. This is probably for the, I don't know if this is for the Dreamcast version or not. Or, no, it's for the PlayStation 2 version. But that's probably where most people played Code Veronica, is on the PlayStation 2, because I don't think a lot of people had the Dreamcast as a kid. I had a Dreamcast, and it's still one of my top 3 favorite systems ever. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. Resident Evil 5. This one's a pretty thick one. And then Resident Evil 6, which is also a pretty thick one. Pretty heavy. Then also with the strategy guides, I do try to pick up older magazines if I have them, if I find them. Here's the PlayStation magazine back in the day for Resident Evil 3. It's a pretty cool little Jill Valentine right there. And the Resident Evil 4 one. It's rare that I come across these older magazines, PlayStation ones, but when I do, if they're for games I really love, horror games, then I'll pick them up. Next, we have the movies. Of course, most people have probably seen a lot of the movies. Resident Evil. This game, I thought it was pretty good when it came out. Of course, I was waiting over probably 5 or 6 years for the movie to come out, because there was rumors when the game came out, all these talks about a movie coming out. And it took probably at least 5 years from the time the rumors started to the time the movie came out. I watched the movie. I pretty much loved it when it was out. But then as time passed, I was like, wait a minute, that movie actually wasn't that good. It was cool. It was awesome because I was waited so long for a Resident Evil movie, but then I was like, it had nothing to do with the games. Nothing. It had maybe one character from the game in it, but they didn't even resemble how they did in the game. And of course, they kept making kept making movies. Resident Evil Apocalypse. This one had Nemesis in it, which was really cool, but they basically made Nemesis a bitch in it. Resident Evil Extinction, this is where they really started getting off the topic, off the games. Nothing like it at all. Next is Resident Evil Afterlife. Just look at this cover. This is not Resident Evil. This is just straight action. This has nothing to do with what the series originally was. It's ridiculous. Now, I believe there's 1 or 2 more movies in that series. I don't have them at the moment. But they're basically the same thing, just straight action. Pretty much no horror at all anymore. Now, they did release 3 movies that are actually pretty good, Resident Evil movies. And they are all animated. We have Resident Evil Degeneration. Resident Evil Damnation, and Resident Evil Vendetta. Now these are all animated films, but they are very much horror. They resemble the game series more than any of the other movies ever will. And I recommend watching them all. As you see, these are the only ones I have on Blu-ray, because these are the only good ones in the series. So if you're a fan of the series, I recommend watching all 3 of those. And that's pretty much it. Let's move on. So next we have some of the toys. The original toys were made from the company Toy Biz. And here is Jill Valentine from the first game. She's got her Stars outfit on. Chris Redfield. We have Zombie Forrest, who was a member of the Stars group as well, but he ended up dying. Giant spider from the series. I believe you push this button and the back opens up and shoots out spider eggs, which is kind of cool. The dog here is pretty cool. He doesn't stay together that well, but it's supposed to be if you squeeze him a certain way, he just like explodes kind of. All his intestines come out and stuff. It's kind of cool. The dogs always scared me in the first one, especially the very first time I saw them when they jumped through the window at you. Chimera. It's pretty creepy and cool. Here's a random zombie. Looks like he's wearing a lab coat. It exploded on him. Got burned. Bones are showing. Really cool hunter here. I like that he looks like he's got some sort of brain or tissue in his hand from killing a creature. The first time I saw these in the game, they terrified me. They were fast as hell, they were strong. And of course we have Tyrant, the boss of the first one, infected with the T-virus. When this was released, the heart area here was filled with some sort of liquid, and I believe when you push the button it would pump like a heart, which was really cool, but over time that dried out. Those are the figures for the first game. And of course the second one, Leon Kennedy, back when he was a rookie cop. cool figure. Claire Redfield. This is a really nice one. Ada Wong, of course. Cool about this one is her dress is actually fabric, where the other figures it's like just plastic like the rest of the figure. This one's actually like a fabric material. The zombie police officer here is really cool. And of course you push his intestines and his body comes off. So that's cool. You display him like dragging across the floor trying to attack you. Of course the infamous liquor. The tongue's crazy. Ivy. These are always cool little creatures that attack you, spit poison. This is cool. You press the button in the back and the mouth opens up. Mr. X. He has some other parts to go on his arm for when he starts transforming into a different creature. But I think I'm missing them. The G-Virus creature. This one's really cool because it transforms. Has this little part here. It goes on somehow. This is the creature you fight at the end of the game, Resident Evil 2. It's really cool. This one's my favorite. William Birkin. See his face there. It's the creature he turned into. This is cool. The eye moves. Yeah, this is one of my favorite figures. Then of course you have his daughter, Sherry Birkin. And keeps chasing her throughout the game. These are all from the original run of toys too. There are more that came out for the Resident Evil 3 and other games, but they were highly expensive. But they did later on release better quality ones from Nika. Here's Tyrant. That's a really cool detailed figure. See his heart. You see that's a big difference from this original figure. It was really cool and menacing though. And here's a new hunter. A lot bigger. scary face. Let's see, compared to the original. Yeah, it definitely made him a lot bigger. Zombie dog, new one compared to the old one. It's very detailed. This is one of the newer dogs as well. This is pretty detailed. The new liquor. This is a very nice figure. I really like the original one too, but this one's really cool. And of course I had to buy this. This is the original zombie that you see in the very first Resident Evil. This is the first zombie you see. And then last, I have this Nemesis figure here, little display. It was released for the 20th anniversary. Okay. And that's it for the figures I currently have. So the last thing I have is actually a die-cast replica of the STARS Raccoon City Police Department badge. It is really cool. It came out for the 20th anniversary. It was released by Nerd Block. And it's really cool. It's magnetic back. So I can actually put it in my shirt or wear it on a shirt. It's really cool. So that's going to be it for my current Resident Evil collection. There are numerous other items I still want, but I either don't have the money or don't have the space for them right now. So if I pick them up in the future, I might do a follow-up video. So everybody, stay safe, stay cool, and remember, stay retro.